Walk with me through the cellar door.
A storm is coming, Francis.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome back to another episode of Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you all so much for joining us again for another amazing, fantastic episode.
Oh, it always starts with me giggling like an idiot in the background.
So tonight we're going to do some very heavy science. We've decided science is going to be kind of a thing for a little while. We've focused on politics quite a bit, but we couldn't miss out on the opportunity to have a conversation about President Trump, the Secret Service, and whether they're really running out of money or not.
Yeah.
And so we thought that would be a good topic to start out the show with, especially because a lot of people have accused, not only us, but other people on the left of, over-dramatizing Trump and their administration failures. And so I think it's a good topic to look at. And I think it's one of those things where we're going to try and take a very skeptical look and try and ensure that we give everybody as fair a shake as we can, even though the president is a white nationalist. Anyway.
Pretty much.
We're also going to be talking about breast milk and some of the new studies that have kind of found some of the different chemical properties, and I don't want to give it away yet, that will actually help fight different infections in infants. And again,
maybe it's kind of like a different look at it from a different direction, I would say.
Yes. And so they found some new technology, and they're going through all sorts of different tests to try and figure out if this is going to be beneficial or not. And we get to go through the study as much as we can. The last topic that we're going to do for the show is something Hannah brought up about whether bees understand the concept of zero or not.
And it's going to get a bit tangent-y, because basically it was an awesome idea.
Did you use that pun on purpose?
But we wandered.
Tangent-y?
It
like
has
Tanner tangents.
I almost seemed like I was like trying to make it a pun on your name, the fantastic tangents or whatever it is that we were talking about. But yeah, it's just what happened when I thought this topic was cool. So I ended up wandering just in my mind away, and so I kind of found a couple other links, and we'll stretch out the bee and zero conversation a little bit further than just the biology and the brains of these little critters.
Yes. But to begin with, like we said, we wanted to do a little bit on Trump. And so I thought we'd play a little bit of a clip, something from CNN that we heard the other day that kind of inspired this actual discussion.
The multiple weekend excursions to Mar-a-Lago, the repeated visits to his golf club in New Jersey, round-the-clock security for the First Lady and their son inside Trump Tower in Midtown Manhattan until recently. Tonight, there's more scrutiny on the strain of those operations for the men and women who protect President Trump and his extended family.
They are now working overtime hours they are not getting paid for.
Today, Secret Service Director Randolph Alice said about 1,100 agency employees will work overtime hours this year that they won't get paid for without Congress stepping in. Alice pointed out in a statement, quote, "This issue is not one that can be attributed to the current administration's protection requirements, but rather has been an ongoing issue for nearly a decade." Still, observers say Alice has a problem internally at the Secret Service.
And so, that was one of those things. So I heard about this, really the end of yesterday, right? That was kind of the first time I'd heard about it. And I'll be honest, it wasn't something that's ever had come up before, right? I just never heard the Secret Service was going broke. And so the first thing, I thought was, well, of course it is, right? Of course the Secret Service is going broke. I mean, for Christ's sake, we have extravagant president. He's flying all over the world. He's sending his sons on different retreats and political business trips.
Well, they're just naturally jet-setty people. Like, they've always lived globally, and so their family is just used to traveling throughout the world. And now the U.S. government has like a fiduciary response to like pay attention and like watch what they're doing. I mean, it isn't something that they can just be like, oh yeah, that's just Jared Kushner going and do whatever it is he is.
Hearing a new come out saying the Secret Service is broke. So then I sat there and thought, okay, so if that's the case, maybe this is just a hit piece, right? Maybe this is the Washington Post or, the fake news post, whatever you want to call it, according to Trump. Maybe they're just doing this, again, as a way to, take and destroy his character. But I'm the more I got into it, the more I kind of thought, well, I don't know about this. That kind of seems a little silly to me. And we actually found, budgetary numbers on the White House government website. And of course, all the links are into the description. Now, to begin with, the first article we wanted to look at is a political article from back in December 2016. And yes, when I started Googling this, I started finding some of these older articles that have been talking about how the probability that they're going to exceed the budget already exists. Now, if they knew this fact back in December and January, why wouldn't they have been working to get more money back then? Is beyond me. But,
that's the government. They're just slow moving sometimes on that kind of bureaucracy.
But a lot of what the article talks about is that people didn't understand that, how expensive it would be, and not everybody was able to plan for Trump winning. People genuinely thought that Clinton would have, easily ousted Trump. And so there was a lot of illusionary, happenstance inside of the government as well as in the public. And that's part of the reason, Hannah, they actually didn't go into looking at the exact costs and everything that had to go into it until Trump won. And then people said, holy crap, my job just got like 100 times harder because, in all fairness, Trump lives in Trump Tower in the middle of New York,
Yeah.
So that's a little bit hard when you're 5 stories off the ground, and you're accessible by, sea, you're accessible by, being on an island, you're in a bloody tower that's off of the ground. You're pretty easy target for multiple types of terrorist attacks.
Well, there's also just the fact that it costs more to move human. I mean, in the end, really, we are doing much more travel. If he's going to New York or if he's going to Florida, if you go into Jersey, all of these places, they got to pick up everyone and move them everywhere. So there's like 1,000 people in the Trump motorcade. I'm serious. There's like 1,000 people that they have to relocate whenever everything goes wherever it is. And I always initially thought, man, that's got to be so expensive. And seeing these numbers, it is disturbing how much the total budget is for the Secret Service. Because in my head, I can't fathom how they could spend that much. But in the end, I mean, I guess they've been doing it for a long time. But it's not a surprise that this has been more expensive than usual. But I thought it would be, more I guess Trump in his own towers and his own places. I figured the critiques would be that he's basically just charging everyone a ton of money and he's pocketing a bunch of government cash for watching him and babysitting him, basically.
And in some essence, Hannah, that's actually what the first political article talked about. They actually talked about basically the Secret Service budget they claimed was $871.7 million. And that's essentially also got to protect foreign leaders that come to America and visit. The budget for protecting the president and his family is 100% classified, but essentially that's lumped into it, so they kind of merge it all together. So to pay for protecting Trump before his inauguration, the agency is still operating on the budget set aside for the campaign and the transition, which happened to be $72 million between October 1st and January 20th. At that point, we're still looking at the footprint, which again is kind of what we were saying. They didn't know Trump would win. They didn't know how much extra cash was going to be funneled out. Nobody had a contingency plan. Now, the article also does kind of give a good counterpoint. For example, it talks about how Trump, how Melanie wants to stay in the towers and how they don't want to move their son and how he's going to have to travel back and forth, if he wants to see his wife and all these different things. But they also talk about, President Biden. And I want to be fair here, Hannah, because I think if we don't be equivocally fair here, it kind of makes us look a little bit one-sided, right? For example, President or Vice President Joe Biden, he went home every weekend to Delaware, where he spent almost every single weekend, right? Mm-hmm. The Secret Service had to pay more than $2,000 a month just to rent a cottage near his home to protect him. Now, that's $2,000 a month is still only $24,000 a year, right? I mean, we're talking chump change in terms of that. But Obama, who almost never went to his home, essentially went on expensive vacations. Again, the one we referenced earlier was $8 million to go to Hawaii. Now, again, that's according to the Judicial Watch, conservative website. But still, that's $8 million. That's a pretty expensive vacation, you know?
It was like I said, we're moving all of those people to location. And on top of that, it isn't just the Obama family and the Secret Service that are going someplace. If an emergency happens, there has to be infrastructure there. They have to have comms. They have to have connections. They have to have a way to get to Air Force One. They have to be, pilots and standby and military. I mean, there's a ton of other things that in an emergency, all of the facets and technology that have to be used by the president, the leader of the executive branch, the military capitano, he has to have with him all of those people in charge of maintaining that structure and everything have to come to. And that's just an immediate response to whatever, the world throws at us. So all that stuff as well. So whenever they make these decisions, like presidents should be, I guess, conscious, aware of what they're doing is a cost. Like when they go and do something, when they should think that, hey, this is, all the people that voted for me, they are putting this bill. So I should use this, or I should show some form of respect or some kind of just deference to the position and to the people that put him there and are now funding him. Because I remember when he used to say on the campaign trail, I'm a billionaire. I'm super rich. I'm really rich. So what? I don't need Air Force One. I'll pay for my own flights. Or whatever. He was bragging about all that kind of stuff. Like, that's awesome. Why don't you cover some of this bill with all you're doing and running around? Cover your own airfare or something. I mean, but we haven't seen anything like that. He's giving away his salary. That's the only thing that I've seen that he actually did where he didn't need his money. But he is taking full advantage monetarily. And this bill that the Secret Service is getting is just another example of what we expected.
Yep. So the second article that I was looking at was from the Washington Post back in March, where the Secret Service is going to request an additional $60 million in funding for the next year. So now they're actually looking and saying, okay, well, we need another $60 million. Now, if you're looking at an $871 million budget, $60 million, I mean, how much really is that, right? You're not even talking 10% here. You're down closer to that 8% range. But they're talking about it because of his lifestyle. They talk about half of that, $26.8 million, would pay to protect Trump's family and the private home in Trump Towers, this specific document showed, while $33 million would go to be spent on travel costs incurred by the president, vice president, other heads of state. So, no big deal, right? They're requesting a little bit of a budget increase. That seems a little bit more than that inflation rate, though, Hannah. In all fairness, it kind of seems a little bit more than an inflation rate. And in all fairness, when we talk about the presidency here and how he ran on a business platform, he talked about his business. I don't know how you want to say his acumen. There you go, acumen, right? He talked about this. This was a big thing for him, but yet here we are seeing him already request $60 more million. Now, a good businessman is probably going to figure out a way to cut $60 million out of the budget. I mean, essentially, he's already trying to cut healthcare out so that he can protect his family more. Well, that seems a little ridiculous to me, in some aspects. But okay, so let's be fair here. The bigger problem that article points out is that some of the public funding could potentially become revenue for Trump's private companies. The Trump Organization, which owns Trump Tower, the agents must stay in, is something that would receive revenue from, basically us as taxpayers. And so they talk about this, and they talk about, neither the Secret Service nor Trump Organization have disclosed how much public money, if any, is actually being spent. But we know the money's got to come from somewhere.
Yes.
And if they're all
at Mar-a-Lago, and they're all at that same place, and they all have to use all the facilities and everything, Trump's not like, okay, well, my resort is full of guys from the Secret Service. There's no way I'm going to charge anyone anything. Of course he's charging them. Of course he's charging any services, food, anything that goes in there. So that money goes directly from the taxpayers, directly into the Trump Organization. Usually a president divests himself from all of this so that any chance that there could be a possible benefit, I mean, he's making money off the presidency right there. And that isn't even a remote question. That is direct cash flow from the federal government into the organization he owns. I mean, that to me is a huge deal. And this article obviously is talking about that. The cost, I think it was $60,000 for renting golf carts while they're carting around following the president. These kinds of things are, I would call, massive conflict of interest. I mean, way beyond anything where it's like, well, we're not sure if the banks gave him a better rate. No, this is money going directly into his bank account, basically, and that's a bigger deal for me.
Yes, but the biggest, most troubling concerning thing here is the new article that has come out. It was technically released by USA Today. The Washington Post also is, quoted about it, as well as CNN. So there's a whole bunch of news articles reporting on it. And one of my things is, if I see one or two, I kind of go, okay, hey. But now it's starting to come out over and over again. And this is the new one. And, again, they even in the new article, they actually bring up, how Obama has spent almost $100 million over 8 years. What is the small request for $23 million? If Trump's in office for, only 4 years, that's $80 million. So, it's a little bit more, but not as much more. He has a bigger family. So the next article that we looked at actually talks about essentially how many round-the-clock personnel they need, as well as the Trump-size family versus the Obama-size family. So Obama had 11 underneath him, whereas Trump protection number includes 18 members of the presidential family. Now, again, we look at that, right? That's only 7 more people. I mean, I know that's still a lot, but that's still only 7 more people.
If it was only 7 more people, but they were all younger and just staying at the White House all the time, then I would be like, yeah, whatever. That's just the extended family. He happens to have a bigger family than anyone. But these are jet-setting folks who are flying around the world. So, it's a little bit more, but still. These are big spending people.
Yes. For example, Trump's sons Eric and Donald traveled to the United Arab Empires for business this year, essentially, and they had to have security, Secret Service and tail. And essentially, all they were doing is going and opening a Trump brand golf resort in Dubai, which is 8,000 miles from the United States. Now, you and I could argue about this, and I think this is just kind of where some of the ethics and morals don't equate to laws here, right? Yeah. Should we allow for this? How much Secret Service detail is needed? How can we actually tell a president, hey, you or a person, you can't run for president because you got too many kids and you got too many adult kids, right? But the one thing I couldn't find a big comparison on is what happened in the past, right?
Like way in the past? Are we talking?
Well, let's just even talk Bush administration. In the Bush administration, did Bush have any sons that were, being followed around 24/7? Is there other family members in the unit, that had that? And that's the big thing here, right? Is where is the other presidents? So in Obama's situation, all his kids lived with him, right?
Yeah, he just had the 2, and I believe they had a dog.
Yeah, it's okay. So they obviously weren't big jet-setting people, but again, let's move that aside because it's not fair to tell certain people you can't do that. Now, are Eric and Donald Jr. involved in Trump's, cabinet at all? Do they have any ties with government relations? Or are they solely independent individuals running Trump's business? And we talked about this back on, I think, King Trump back in November last year. And we kind of talked a little bit about what that meant, right? Would Trump divest himself? Would he remove himself from power? Would he take other cabinet positions and not give them to people that had, prime real estate inside of his company? Because again, it goes back to, yeah, they're asking for $60 million more dollars. Maybe it's justified, maybe it's not. But what happens here? Right? What happens to families like this who have older kids, who have, successful business careers, successful in quotes, and, they have all these things, right? How can we tell them you can't go live your life and run your business when you're already used to doing that? Why should they be disenfranchised? I don't agree with that. But the bigger question becomes is when we look at Melanie Trump and she says, I'm going to live in Trump Tower. I'm not going to come to the White House. I'm not going to do that. Why should my kid have to be uprooted? Well, what has been traditionally said? Most of the time, the families move to the White House.
I was going to say, I don't know of any example where the direct, immediate presidential family did not entirely reside in the White House. And, I mean, I understand that there are, that family is weird. Like, that's not a normal family. And so the structure and the things that they do, I wouldn't expect to be normal. But there are some things that, when not done by the president, they are kind of a slap in the face of tradition, and this is obviously a case where there's a major expenditure there. It's like I was talking about earlier, when it's like respect for the position and respect for the people who are now paying for everything. I'm sorry, what's Trump's son's name? Bannon
or something like that.
Yeah, Barron.
Barron.
Sorry, Barron. I mean, your daddy's the richest guy or whatever, and he's the president of the country. You're gonna have to make this sacrifice and go live in the dump that they called the White House, because it's just an old building, I'm assuming, compared to what they're used to living to. But it's just a respect thing there that upsets a lot of people. And I'm not that much of a traditionalist, and I still feels like they're disrespecting kind of the reverence of just a democratic republic that we have.
For me, it's about the money. It's about, if you run on a conservative value, at least show conservative values. If you're going to run like this, right? Why not say, okay, we're going to do this, but here's the deal: we're going to figure out I'm going to reduce that amount of money, because
fiscal conservatism. Hell yeah.
Yeah. In turn, he's turning around and going to Florida every weekend, and we sit there and go, okay, on our dime. Yeah.
It'd be different if he was going on his own bill. Like, he's like, I'm so rich, I'll pay for everything. Well,
exactly.
Ahead,
whereas if he is paying for his trips to Florida and for the Secret Service to come around with it, and it's coming all out of his pocket, then that would be a little bit different, because it's not going to hit the budget. But what's the most concerning here, and this is this is really the heart of this article. It says the Secret Service said money that it has enough money to cover the cost of protecting President Trump and his family just through the end of September. After that, the agency will hit a federal mandated cap on salaries and overtime unless Congress intervenes. So there's three questions I have. One, is this something that Trump has set, a precedent, right? Or is it something that happens all the time? That's question one, right? Question two is, didn't we just learn that the budget to protect foreign dignitaries is included in protecting the president and his family? And we actually have budget numbers, so we can look at this. Then the last question is why is he not saying, okay, instead of, I'll compromise here, maybe I went a little bit overboard, maybe I need to come back a little bit. Instead of going to Florida, I'm just going to hang out here at the White House, but I'm going to lock all the doors and no one can come in and talk to me, and I want somebody to bring a golf cart and a golf course or something like that, or I'm going to rent a golf course, every weekend so I can go golfing, every Saturday, right? Where's our compromise here in this president?
Something, some kind of, reduction of the gravitas. Like, okay, I'm going to stand true to my promise that I don't need to be sucking off the nipple of American taxpayer.
So let's go through the numbers real quick here, because I don't want to overly complicate this. But so, for example, the budget that they talked about was like $871 million. I found from the government website it was $886 million. So if you take $886 million and divide it by 12, you're looking at roughly $73.8 million a month that would be spent. Now, if they're ran out of money 7 months into the year, take that and go $886 million divided by 7. That's $126.6 million a month. So now take that and times that by 12. You blew the budget out to $1.5 billion. The actual, just so you know, the total budget, for the Secret Service is $1.9 billion. You are now inflating over half of that for your own personal cause. So you're literally going to be leaving roughly $300 million left over from the budget, right? Man. That's what you're going to leave. Now, think about that. Just think about that. When we talk about American conservatism, and we talk about cost expenditures, and we talk about where we're going to cut our finances from, and everybody wants to get rid of government-funded this and that, here you go. Here's a government reduction I agree with. Let's get rid of some of these protections for the president if it's going to cost us this amount of money. Let's take these things into consideration if we're going to start allowing people like him to be president. And we got to say, we're going to put limits and caps in for this. So, you know what, Trump? No, we're not going to pay for you to go to frickin', Mar-a-Lago, Florida every weekend. This is what we're going to do. We're going to set a budget of X amount of dollars, which you get to use for personal expenses, vacation type things. And you don't even have to tell us what that is, as long as it's equal per president. So if Obama spent $98 million, so just let's say $100 million in 8 years, that's like what, 1.2 million?
Close enough.
Or 12? No, okay, hold on. No, let's do this right. 100 million.
Okay.
divided by 8 years is $12.5 million a year. So
Yeah.
Trump, you get to spend $12.5 million a year. We'll give it inflation and put it into the budget. Call it a day. Right? So fine. You got $12.5 million a year that you can spend on whatever you want. But when it runs out, don't come crying to us. You need to start making compromises. Oh, and by the way, in my opinion, as somebody that says he's fiscally responsible, you need to submit a budget to us on what we need to spend our $12.5 million on. That's what we need to know.
Yeah, and if he wants to keep going up, like, you got to foot the bill. If you
Exactly.
want more, it just becomes your responsibility. That way, there's some kind of fiscal thought happening here. So, like, the president's making all the decisions, and he has to think, well, do I want to spend all that money or not? Do I want to spend a pile of my own money at the end of the year? If that's no, then he needs, there needs to be some kind of degree of decorum here. There needs to be some kind of, self-control. And that's what I think is, we typically see these leaders or whatever, and they're usually wealthier, but they wouldn't be able to cover the cost of running the Secret Service and all of these types of protections. And so they would refrain. Even the richest guys that have been in charge of this country would pull back a little bit and think twice about spending that much money. I think that would be a good thing for Donald Trump to learn, is just to calm down a bit and think things through.
Exactly. And that's the thing here, right? We're talking, about the 800, almost $900, million to $1.5 billion. And while, again, everybody's got to have a life and your whole life can't be dedicated to just running the country without any sort of a break, let's at least hold you to what you claim you're going to do. Let's hold you to these principles, because I said it before, Trump's not a Republican. He's an outsider candidate who just happened to be, picked by the Republicans. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about breastfeeding and where we'll make our next show appearance. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
Hey, this is Keith.
And this is Jen, and we're from Not Another Atheist Podcast.
You're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Join the revolution.
Hi, this is Dan,
Brian,
and Matt,
with the Godless Revolution podcast. We've had a lot of great guests on this show.
such as Russell Glasser, Dan Arrow, Brian Fields, David Silverman, Doug Mesner, a.k.a. Lucian Greaves, and Joey Kirkman, whom we love a lot.
We've also had a lot of really cool local guests. And we're a podcast that likes to fight for the separation of church and state and against anti-skepticism of all kinds.
You should give us a listen, because if you don't, you're going to be really sad.
Make your ears happy. Listen to the Godless Revolution podcast.
If you'd like to join the ranks of Patreons and sponsor the show, head over to patreon.com/Cellar Door Skeptics. For less than a 20-ounce soda or an energy drink each week, you can help sponsor us, the hosts, and our charity of choice. Patreon helps Cellar Door Skeptics create better content, become better activists, and it's going to help you stay healthier by drinking one less soda or one less energy drink each week. Click the link in the notes of the show to sponsor us today, because we bring the discussion with the sources.
This is C-Web from ParanormalSkepticAcademy.com, and you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics. Prepare for the revolution.
Now, back to the show.
Oh, welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you all so much for joining us for another amazing episode.
And listening to what sounds like a computer dying here.
Oh
what do
my
we
gosh,
got?
it does
the
not.
dubstep, skip it action here.
You know what, Hannah? I'm telling you what, you get to make commercials. That's the deal. You get to go back, you get to redo all the commercials, you can redo all the music.
Here.
Exactly. Were you listening to it or something? Awesome. Anyway, after that quick malfunction there. Anyway, so we are going to be joining Marissa McCool on the Inciting Incident podcast coming up here next month. Of course, whenever she releases the episode, we will be more than happy to share and post it and let everybody know exactly where you can hear us after hours.
We'll send you to the right parts of the internet.
What's that?
I said we'll send everybody to the right parts of the internet. I mean, because it gets weird out there. If you make a wrong turn, you are in some serious nastiness. So we'll take control and send you to the right spot, and you can listen to us try our best to sound intelligent and meaningful and useful in someone else's playground.
Yes. So the next segment we wanted to do is an article I happened to find, again, on Reddit, because Reddit's kind of my favorite area to go to recently.
It's the fourth biggest website on the internet now, as far as the last count. It's the fourth most traveled page on the internet. It's crazy how big it is.
So there was an article that I found interesting that says sugar in human mother's milk are non-toxic antibacterial agents. Doctors at Vanderbilt University have discovered that some of the carbohydrates in human milk not only possess antibacterial properties of their own, but also enhance the effectiveness of the antibacterial proteins also present. So I was like, okay, this sounds like common sense. It does. You know, should we continue to look into this, or should I just dismiss it? And I was like, I'm not going to dismiss it. I'm going to go ahead and read it, because some of the debate that I've seen, go around in different groups has been, whether women should have to breastfeed or not. And this article actually does not say you need to go out and breastfeed your children. So by any means, we are not advocating a mandatory breastfeeding. We understand that it does not work for everyone. We understand that there's lots of different types of, ways people nurture their children. And so...
and we're two cis white males who...
that's fair. Fair enough, and that too.
Every time a topic like this is like, this is an awesome topic, but we will never, provided the science limits us for the rest of our lives, we will never breastfeed. We will never know whether or not we can do it even though we want to, or what. So that's a lot of the case. Like, some women, they want to. That's what they want to do. In their biology, their bodies just can't handle it, just don't do it. And so there's a lot of stuff that comes into it that is not choice at all, too. It isn't so much whether or not you choose one or the other. So there's all kinds of other stuff. We, as fathers, we have been told breast milk is something that's really good. It's got an antibiotic and all kinds of other, benefits. And so this is just like a new look, as far as I've been told, as far as what is good about breast milk.
Yep. And I have a little clip I wanted to play to kind of kick this off.
We've always known that breast milk is basically a transference of the mom's immune system to the baby.
But new research from Vanderbilt chemist Stephen Townsend shows it's not just breast milk proteins that protect babies.
My team has discovered that sugars are very important. Sugars possess some of the same powers as proteins, but have a little bit different activity.
Townsend's team focused their research on group B strep, bacteria often found in pregnant women. It's the leading cause of infection in newborns.
We were basically just trying to figure out, are there alternative ways to treat group B strep that don't involve the use of antibiotics?
They discovered that the sugars in breast milk attack group B strep bacteria and other infectious bacteria found even in adults, just like an antibiotic.
The more we use antibiotics, the more bacteria become resistant to them. So this is an interesting approach, because these molecules, the milk sugars, they behave like antibiotics, but they're not antibiotics. They're not toxic. You could consume tons of them, nothing would happen.
So breast milk sugars could help more than just babies.
If you can figure out how the sugars are acting, then you can justify attempting to make large-scale amounts of them and then putting them in humans.
So I thought that was interesting, right? After I listened to that clip on the Vanderbilt University, news site, I said, this is pretty interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say this is interesting because we're all of a sudden going, oh, yay, we can now breastfeed and it's going to, be so amazing for our children. I say this because it's unique in what they're discovering, So when we talk about the complexity, right, we talk about the complexity of what breast milk is and where the proteins are gone. A lot of the research in the past has literally focused on the proteins versus sugars, right? And so that's what was amazing is they're now finding new ways and how different things interact. And what's cool to me about this is we sit there and we talk all the time, and creationists like to, diss us for this by basically saying, well, look, science keeps changing. How is anybody supposed to know what's going on? Blah, 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 blah. But this is exciting to me because all of a sudden we're finding a new way that antibacterial activity happens, as part of the human milk. And that's exciting to me, right? Because what does that mean? Science is changing, you know?
Science is changing, but this is really cool. Science basically usually changes for the better. Very few times has a scientific progression resulted in an absolutely negative result. I mean, one could argue that the first atomic bombs, the harnessing of nuclear energy, had a major negative impact, but I don't know. It kind of ended one of the biggest wars, or the biggest war in the world's history, and it did kill a lot of people really quickly, but the number of millions and millions of people that may have been saved because of that, and then think about nuclear energy and stuff. So usually, even if you take a 10,000-foot look back, most scientific progress is generally in a positive direction, and this isn't a change where we're finding about the sugars having all kinds of probiotic and antibiotic abilities, and then we're just discarding everything we learned about the benefits of the proteins in breast milk and just in lactose and any of that other stuff. This is just adding to it. This is more good information, more reasons why breast milk is good, and more understanding as to how it is good. So everything that we're learning here is a benefit. If not directly that you as a mother need breast milk to nurture your child, but let's say that we take some of the things we learn here about these sugars and we apply them through chemistry, through all of the things that we use as the foundational building blocks, and put that into formula, put that into synthetics that we can help for women who can't nurse, women who work, because the United States is so good at making sure that maternity and paternity leave are so long, but taking that politics out of it is that we could essentially use this new technology to make sure children get these special these sugars and these proteins, no matter whether or not they use antibiotic, bacterial benefited breast milk, or if they use the synthetics. And this is not a net loss for proteins. We've changed what we think, but we're learning more as we go on, and this is obviously a benefit.
Exactly. So they talk about the first example of generalized antimicrobial activity on the part of the carbohydrates in human milk. This is literally the first time that they've actually seen it. So assistant professor of chemistry Stephen Townsend directed this specific study. He says one of the most remarkable properties of these compounds is that they are clearly non-toxic, unlike most antibiotics. And that's kind of a big discussion here, right? And we haven't actually, I don't think we've done that on the show before, where we've talked about antibiotics being extremely ineffective with overuse and all that other gibberish.
Well, we did a little bit in the evolutionary debates, because one of the things I asked Aaron about was, is medicine good? Because there are all kinds of reasons why medicine can be bad, not letting the natural human system take care of stuff. So, there was a morality question in that. But we talked a little bit about antibiotics and evolution and how that medicine has changed over time.
Exactly. And that's, that's the big thing here. This study was revealed basically, I believe, this week or end of last week at the American Chemical Society in Washington, D.C. And the title of the actual paper was called Human Milk. I'm not going to try and pronounce it. Maybe I will. Oligosaccharide exhibit antimicrobial and antibiofilm properties against Group B Streptococcus. Good enough. And I'm sober.
I'm trying to find it. Which was that in the research for News at Vanderbilt?
Yep. Yes, it was. So essentially, their motivation for this research was the growing problem with bacterial resistance to antibiotics. And essentially, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that 23,000 deaths occur because of resistance to antibiotics. That's a lot of deaths, right? Yeah. That's a lot of people dying or babies dying.
That's a lot of evolution happening, too. Yeah. That's another thing. It's like these antibiotics, the reasons they don't work anymore is because the things that we're trying to fight, the microbes, are evolving resistance to it, because every time they run up into it, the only ones that survive are the ones that have natural resistances. And so those are the only ones that live. And therefore, the only ones the strongest survive. I'm going to give that title a try, though. Human milk oligosaccharides exhibit antimicrobial and antibiofilm properties against Group B Streptococcus. That was fun to say. I enjoyed that. So yeah, anyone want to take a look at the paper? One of the things is there's a paywall on it. So if you're in a college and you have login abilities, then you'd be able to get it in there. But in the end, that 23,000 deaths annually, these are the things that we don't talk about in the United States as far as medicine, science, and infant mortality rates. I mean, it's actually gotten worse in the last couple decades, and we're seeing an increase in danger and bad stuff happening in our medical systems. Even though everyone in the U.S. clearly knows that we have the best medical system in the world, right?
Yeah, we have the best of the best because
that was one of the best
way it is.
Daily Show ones I've ever seen. Is they had the guy who was basically a huge proponent. I think he was a senator, and the Daily Show had this special group of people that go around the world to help people, and they were describing where they were last weekend. And the guy was like, "I know, we need to make sure we save those people." And then the guy was like, "Actually, they were just in Tennessee." It's like third world conditions in healthcare in Tennessee. So.
Yes. So when again going back and looking at this, right? So they decided to focus on a specific group, right? They decided to focus on a specific disease called Group B Strep. And I guess, and I'll be honest, I didn't know this, but I guess that's one of the more infectious bacteria that can actually get hosted inside of pregnant women, as well as infants. Did not know that, but that's one of the big things that actually causes infection in newborns worldwide. So that's crazy, right? So of course that's the best one to focus on if that's the highest, hitter. And so as they're doing all this research, and they're looking at the different importance of the sugars, right? And so to do the research, and this is what I kind of found, very interesting, because it's got to be really hard to collect data on sugar, right? I mean, sugar is not consistent. Your body interprets it different, based on the person. So like sugar breakdown will be consistent for all of us to some extent, but at some point it's also going to be completely different, right? Hannah, your body probably processes sugar different than mine. And that's just all part of the basic genome that we've, evolved from, right? And so it's really hard to, look at this. And that's why, again, I thought this study was very, intuitive, because it's like, hey, we're going to take something and do something extremely hard and try and prove a point out of it, So to do the researcher collected human milk carbohydrates, also called that word I'm not going to try and say again, that I tried to say earlier, that just makes me sound like Trump and I don't like it, from a different number of donor samples, and profiled them with a mass spectrometer technique that can identify thousands of large biomolecules simultaneously. They then added the compounds to strep cultures and observed the results under a microscope. What they discovered is that not only do some of these sugars kill the bacteria directly, but some also physically break down the biofilms that the bacteria form to protect themselves. That's interesting, right? And if you read through, and I didn't know much about biofilm, honestly, to be honest with you again, but when you start reading through the Reddits, and again, this is where I went and said, hey, I'm really interested in this. There was somebody in here that essentially said, that was a big interesting point, is the biofilm, right? If we could start breaking down the biofilm, if we can do this, what's going to happen to how fast we can start getting rid of this bacteria?
Yeah, bacteria, the biofilms themselves are just like little force fields that these things put up. So a lot of times if you deal with anything that has a problem with bacterial growth, it's something that, a weird tangent, but at work in my coolant systems, we have microbial growth. And if a machine doesn't get used, there'll be a film that grows on that, and it's just bacterial growth. And those kinds of biofilms, the stuff where it allows itself to insulate it from, a harsh environment, so the air and the chemicals in the coolant, like that kind of thing is that resilient to handle, probably dangerous chemicals. It can handle the human body, which is not a very intense and dangerous place for a lot of harsh and corrosive chemicals. And so we need to be able to basically break down through this so they can get past the force field, and then you can potentially attack and deal with any of these bacteria. And that word, I'm going to say it again for you, it's oligosaccharides.
I'm not going to remember.
Come on, it's like oligarchs.
Oligosaccharides. There you go. See, I got it right.
Oligosaccharides.
Oligosaccharides. Close enough. So in a pilot study, they essentially collected 5 different samples. They found the sugars from one sample nearly killed an entire strep colony. In another example, the sugars only moderately affected, while the remaining 3 samples exhibited low levels of activity. In a follow-up study, they're going to start testing more than a dozen additional samples. So, again, like I said, this is a very promising study. It looks at biofilm breakdown of that because, again, what is biofilm essentially caused by, right? That bacteria doesn't want to be killed off. It wants to survive itself. It's an evolutionary trait. So if we're able to overcome that evolutionary trait, that's pretty amazing, right? I mean, that's got to be pretty bloody amazing, Hannah, if we can actually overcome that, because what can we start doing? We can now start genetically modifying, right? It's not actually genetically modifying, but we can actually start changing the genome, and we can start killing off these bacteria in a whole different way. And it might all be because of natural evolution of how a woman develops breast milk, right?
Well, yeah, it's part of what basically the human body has devised to help keep these microbials and bacteria at bay. And so the people who are better at creating these things take away our artificial environment that most of humanity lives in as far as the modernized world now, where, the strongest and the healthiest are the only ones to reproduce is not really the case anymore. Then, we see, variations in non-linear directions. And so essentially these evolutionary things are invariants in our populace. But if you had just a pure natural society, then these things would be the things that keep people alive and keep birth rates up. So I mean, this is awesome. This is more evidence of how the human biology and human genome is working against and protecting everything inside our bodies.
Yep. And the last thing I want to point on before we move out of the segment is that what they're doing is they talk about this too. The effectiveness that the biofilms are being broken down are allowing other antimicrobial agents that breast milk contains to go and actually fight this bacteria. So that's even more exciting, is that if you think about it, what could you do? So if you could figure out how to isolate what type of sugars it is, you can start creating vaccines out of this. So it doesn't have to mean you have to breastfeed your child to get these antimicrobial attributes. You would be able to vaccinate people and start working towards killing off these different things. And even if it wasn't a vaccination per se, right?
Yeah, and I was saying, using it as like a supplement.
Yes.
In formula.
Exactly. You would now be able to start doing all sorts of different things and reducing those 23,000 deaths down to, let's just say, 5 deaths.
I prefer 0, but let's
That's
be
an impossibility.
Realistic. Let's
do
be realistic.
we need to get down to the zero-sum game here, buddy?
I'm just going to go with a utopian solution to this, because life is a science fiction movie, and I can't
We're
wait
all brains
until...
in a vat?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd go that far, but I would really like to see things like snow crash and all that stuff start to come through.
Maybe.
I'm a nerd. Let's go read some books.
So again, that for me, that's the big exciting thing. That's why I get excited by this, especially because when we talk with our friend Abby and she works in that area of vaccinations and biology and all that, it's exciting. And I wish I could have got her on the show, but she was a little too busy to join us tonight. But the exciting thing again is that we're seeing science take action in the real world to help solve human problems. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics as we talk about bees and if they've become mathematicians. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
This is Matthew the Apostle from In the Name of God, the podcast. And you are listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Hi, this is Trav Mamone, host of the By Any Means podcast. Join me every week as I interview bloggers, podcasters, writers, and activists about the intersections of atheism, humanism, racial justice, feminism, LGBTQ rights, and other social issues. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes, Spreaker, and Stitcher, and you can read my blog at freethoughtblogs.com/byanymeans. And remember, that's bi spelled B-I. Come take a listen to the musings of a queer humanist because, hey, aren't we all a little bi-curious?
Looking for something new and exciting, or maybe just a change from the old Atheist Show format? Cellar Door Skeptics podcast provides listeners with hours of enjoyment each week on Spreaker and iTunes. Check us out as we talk politics, religion, science, reviews of books and music, along with the occasional interview just for a twist. Join Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern as they bring fresh content to you. Walk with us through the cellar door as we help you prepare for the revolution. You can find us on Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, and even on Facebook.
This is Trav Mamone, host of the By Any Means podcast, and you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics. Prepare for the revolution. We have cookies.
Now, back to the show.
And welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. We're on our third Fireball segment here. We're not going to go.
Like
we're not
Fireball.
Gonna go,
Are we doing shots of whiskey now that I
not
don't know
quite?
About it?
We got a nice calm. I'm drinking some laid back platinum. So I'm just not going with the hardcore craft brews here. But basically, what I was going to say that we're keeping the heavy duty momentum of science moving forward here for this next segment. I wanted to talk about bees. And it went way past that. So basically, we were trying to find another segment to talk about, and I had this one saved because I wanted to talk about it, but I hadn't really thought about where I wanted to go with it. Because I started reading it, and it was about bees understanding the number 0. And this is a Reddit find. So did you see this at all before I sent it to you?
Actually, I didn't. This didn't show up on my... Which you think it would have showed up because... We've talked about bees on this stupid show for, I don't know, like hundreds of times now. Like, this has got to be like our 5th bee segment. We must just love bees.
Well, pollination is a big deal. I mean, we love plant sex.
And maybe it was just because, the title of, the Reddit segment, talking about bees and, math equations. And I'll be honest, math's not my favorite subject. I'm definitely not the spiffiest on math. It's not my forte.
Yeah, well, that's what it is. This isn't that mathy. So there's no equations, and it's really more the philosophical.
What are you talking about? There is equations in there, buddy.
Well, as far as the first article, there are no real equations in it. So essentially what they're talking about is understanding the number 0, understanding the concept of 0. And they say that bees seem to in this. And at first I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive. They said that they are the first invertebrate shown to understand that concept. And so what they were done, this is the first experiment, the insects were encouraged to fly towards a platform carrying fewer shapes than another one. And apparently they recognized no shapes as a smaller value than some shapes. So what they did is they trained these bees in a very specific way. But what they gave is a disclaimer, essentially that 0 is not an easy concept to comprehend. And that was the first thought here, is that, okay, yeah, cool, bees can kind of sort of understand 0. And then they said that, it's not easy to understand. And then I thought, if I had to explain 0 to someone, I don't believe I would be able to. It would be a long meandering. It would take all kinds of trying to figure it out and formulate my thoughts. And they say on here, even young children learn the number 0 later than other numbers, and they often have trouble identifying whether it is less or more than 1. And so these types of problems, basically I was reading this bee article, it was pretty cool what they found, but I was thinking more broadly and more on a mathematical concept. But just for the beginning here, this is the bee experiment. They train these bees to essentially fly into a certain area, and the 2 platforms, one of them had between 1 and 4 shapes on it. And on one platform, the bees were given a sweet sucrose solution, which is essentially sugar, and the other nasty-tasting quinine solution, which they had found that previous research said bees they learn quicker, not if one is just a reward and the other one is not a reward. They actually have to punish the bees. Obviously, that would, that negative reinforcement actually works as far as training bees And so when they had a negative, disgusting, gross thing, it would actually learn from that and seek out the sweeter one, which is pretty intense. But I mean, it's kind of ethics feel a little bit raunchy on that, but they basically trained these bees to associate the platform that had fewer shapes on it with the sweet reward. So whenever there was like 6 on one or 4 on one, and then on the other platform there would only be 1, the one that had the less number would have the sweet solution on it. And so these bees needed to associate numbers. So if there was 1 on there and there was less than 4, they could tell that 1 was less, and they would associate that with sweet. But when they put no platform or no objects on that platform, the bees realized and they understood that 0, nothing on the platform, is less than having 1, 2, 3, or 4. And they went to the platform with 0 shapes most of the time. I believe they were talking around the order of 80% or something. So this is kind of like, wow, that's an interesting, finding that they were able to distinguish between an empty platform with essentially nothing on it and a platform with stuff on it, and then associate that with the reward as opposed to the punishment.
So you're saying essentially, if I had 4 mini, I don't know, sweet tarts, and I put them on there, and 3 of them, let's say, I would make disgusting, or did they make all 4 of them disgusting?
Anything on the platform that had more, so the one platform would have more objects on it, and that platform would have a solution of disgusting on it, and the other platform, which had less. So if one had 4 and one had 3, the one with 3 would have the sweet solution. And then with one with 3 and one with 2, the 2 would have the sweet solution, and so forth. So whichever one had the lower number of objects would have the sweet solution. And 0 is lower than 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the bees understood that having nothing on the platform would be the sweet solution.
And so they were actually given a sweet solution with nothing on the platform.
Yes, because that is still the lower number. That's what they're trying to see.
How did they get a sweet solution, though?
There was just it isn't the object that they were licking or eating. It was just a little bowl of something there.
There you go. Okay.
So,
I get it.
yeah, they're not eating the object.
Like, I didn't know. I thought maybe they were licking sweet tarts or something like that. So, like, we're going to make that one the fart-tasting one. It's like a jelly bean, right? We're going to make it... The brown one is going to either be poop...
Chocolate or barf.
Chocolate.
Those
Exactly.
are the worst. I can't, no to those people forever who make Russian roulette out of jelly beans. Okay.
Side tangent for a second here, because I just can't help myself, especially an hour into the show. I have a video on my Facebook, and I think it's public, so anybody that wants to go back and find it. I have 2 sons that are very similar in age. They bought these, I bought these. They didn't actually pay for them. I bought these jelly beans for them, that were bamboozled. And they were testing them. They were sitting in my living room testing them, and they were like challenging each other. And all of a sudden, they went into the bathroom, and I was like, all right, well, you guys figured out which one is the worst tasting. I don't remember which one, whether it was vomit or poop or something like that. And they had 2 colors of the same thing, and they each took one and put it in their mouth. And I literally videotaped them eating them. And of course, one of the sons had the good one, and one of the sons had the bad one. And he literally like spit it out in his mouth, and the other one's like holding his thumb up, like, "Yeah, this is good." Ha ha ha! Look at that guy.
That's pretty bad. So I imagine the bees were probably similar. So one was like, "This is the best," and so they learned. Basically, they learned. And there was another experiment that was kind of the same thing. They had they were trained in the same way, but this time they had to choose to land on a platform with either 0 or between 1 and 6 objects, and they consistently chose 0, but were less accurate and took more time when the other option was 1 rather than 6 objects. So when the number of objects on the platforms was both low, they still had to think a little bit, and they chose incorrectly more often than they did on the original one. So there's some area here where there's some variance, and so it's not like, oh, every bee understands a 0, but these experiments suggest that bees' comprehension of 0 is similar that some humans and primates. So we're talking about chimps and stuff. So one of the other articles that I have on here is from Better Explained, and it's a pretty cool thing about the concept of 0, because I read about this bee thing and I thought, that's cool. We have a bee that sort of maybe kind of has an idea of what it means to be a 0. And I said, well, what is 0? And this is a pretty cool one that was nice in, lay people's terms, because I was worried that when I looked for it, I was just going to get to a math lecture. And this is pretty cool because it is simpler. So is 0 equals 1 minus 1? Well, on the calculator, that's just similar. It's just equivalence. It's 1 minus itself, or a number minus itself. So it's identical. But when it comes to actual, physics, algebra, and programming and stuff, it changes a little bit. So this article talks a little bit about the differences between what nothing is in physics. And it says there's a notion of a stable and unstable equilibrium. So take two pencils, lay one on the table, and balance the other on its tip. They're both balanced. There's zero motion, yet one is in a precarious position, carefully opposing the pull of gravity, while the other lays peacefully. Lie on the floor for 10 minutes, hold the plank pose for 10 minutes. From a physics perspective, no work is done, but your quivering arms tell a different story. And so these are the types of things where there's no movement, there's no motion happening here, but it takes energy to exert it and stuff. So there's differences between 0 and nothing happening in physics versus math and algebra, balancing before each equation. And then in programming, obviously, everything in computers is zeros and ones. So those types of things are different from what these bees are doing. The bees and early humans were much more rudimentary. And so we can talk about calculus. And if anybody's interested, just go ahead and take a look at this one, because this is just like a learning source. And so you can learn about society and the philosophy, Eastern philosophy, and then different ideas. But it's just a cool idea as far as what is going on in math. But the last one that I wanted to share from the Scientific American is essentially what we hear about most of the time when you hear from who invented 0. So I know you were watching some videos and doing a crash course in 0. So you saw that basically the Indians, from the BBC, the Indians were basically, not Indians as in the stupid American version of Indians, where we say Indians, no, they're Native Americans. You're Indians. It's the actual Indians, the older society in there is what they were talking about in the BBC, right?
Yes, and they were talking about where 0 was developed, where did we first discover it?
Yeah. And so they don't really know, but this is something that I kind of suspected, but I liked. And so in this, there's a few different videos out there, and there are some really cool ones. This is the Scientific American thing, and essentially they talk about who invented 0 and where and what and kind of how it came through. There's a book, Robert Kaplan, the author of Nothing That Is, A Natural History of 0. And this is essentially a book about that. But what they talk about is in multiple occurrences of 0 showing up throughout human history. And my interpretation of a lot of these different show-ups of the Sumerians, the Indians, the Egyptians, the different various ways of writing that number, is that humans kind of evolved our brains the same way. And so for that, all of the humans that are currently alive, the differences between us is less than 1% or something like that. I mean, it's just ridiculously similar it's ridiculous how similar our genome is regardless of any kind of appearance changes or anything like that. And so to me, it's not surprising that throughout multiple places throughout the entire world, our brains and societies, with small variations as far as time is concerned, kind of sort of devised written words and numerical concepts and kind of started to find things similar to a 0 if given enough time for society to kind of move forward. And that is kind of, it's a warm and fuzzy thing for me. It makes me feel good. That this is just more evolutionary support that the brain is also an evolutionary thing, and so is society and everything.
Yeah, and reading through that Scientific American article, they talk about how, as 0 emerged, it talks a little bit about how people thought it was kind of a magical, thing. Like, holy crap, how did we get here? We don't know what this means. Is this dark arts? And that's kind of, to me, that was very interesting, because it's like, why would, and maybe this is just common sense now, but back then, they didn't understand what 0 was or how to understand the actual history of it, right?
Yeah. Well, the actual history of it changes for each area you're in. So if you look at like medieval times and the Dark Ages, the history of 0 is tumultuous. It's horrible. I mean, the things they did to mathematicians and people who said that there could be basically a 0, there could be a hole, an emptiness, something that doesn't have God in it. And it became something that, if you were a supporter of this mathematical concept, you could get lit on fire in the streets and people would throw food at you, which makes no sense to me unless you're cooking something. But in the end, this entire thing is just a massive regression as far as human civilization. But we don't hear about certain things, about things like that happening in the early Indian cultures. I would think that since their religion is much more I can't think of the word, but basically the multiple gods is still very paganistic. That the idea of zeros and something isn't so threatening because we're not looking at singular as in all powerful and monotheistic perspectives. But the Chinese also had these types of concepts, and we don't hear about genocides and wars over religious perspectives and including mathematical concepts. So it's different depending on where you are. The Mesoamericans also, the Southern and Latin American cultures, had numbers for zeros, and they did all kinds of weird sacrificial things as far as their religious views and the way in which they structured their societies. And so these kinds of numbers and these kinds of concepts could have caused tumultuous times there. But in the end, what we're seeing is that everyone kind of didn't really know what to do with it, but it always showed up. It always showed up, and eventually through modern times and the Arabics creating algebra, and I think after the Roman times when we created the basic numeral system, where it was kind of consistent throughout the entire world, we had some consistency there. Then you're looking at a basic explanation of zero itself that could be understood basically by everyone, because you kind of have to have a consistent point there. The numbers need to be the same. You know what I mean? Like, if everybody's got different numbers, how do you explain what the start is? And so once we sort of got the world and everyone on the same concept of what a zero is, using the same mathematical numerology and proofs, the logic itself, then it kind of makes sense. So that, like, bringing it back to the bees, like, we wouldn't know that the bees could understand zero if we all didn't have the ability to understand that basic logic of, the negation of space, the divider between positive and negative on the number lines, all of the different things that zero basically takes up in the different ways in which it's applied. It's a very useful number and an absence of a number. I mean, it's just a really cool concept that showed up out of nowhere, and it sucked up a few minutes of my time trying to figure out what kind of a wild ride tangent I wanted to take at midnight in the middle of a normal weekday.
Yeah, I don't know. And I guess I never thought about the, thing of zero. I mean, I guess if you think about it in daily life, right? If I run out of alcohol, I have zero alcohol, and that sucks. And when I run out of video game to play, I have zero parts of the video game that I haven't beaten, and that kind of sucks.
If you had certain algebraic notations for describing how much alcohol you had, you could never actually get to zero because you would have an infinite riser. We talk about the or the oh man, I can't remember what it was. And the different sine and cosine and tangent graphs, you would have the asymptote, which would be this, a number that everything would go towards infinity the closer you got to it. So, I mean, if you had a calculus equation explaining how much alcohol you had, you may never be able to get to zero.
I could tell you I wouldn't have enough to get drunk on, so it doesn't matter. We'll put it this way. When it's less than a shot and it's just lining the outside of the glass, it don't mean shit, buddy.
Yeah, well, if you drink half of the glass of each time you take a sip, you will have alcohol forever.
You would, but it would be pointless. It would be like drinking water. And in that case, I might as well save my money and just drink water because it's free.
Well, it wouldn't technically be forever either, because once you get down to the molecular level, like you can't break alcohol down once it gets to one left. But one left is a long ways. You'd be a old grade man by the time you got to the end of that one shot.
Yeah, and I don't think I would do that, Hannah. That seems rather silly to me.
I would like to watch you try.
No, I don't think you would. I don't think that would be... Why would that be fun? Why would it be fun to torture me? Be like, we're going to let you taste it. That must be like what alcoholics sometimes feel like, right? Like I can have a taste, but nothing more. And that would be torturous, so I can understand why they just abstain, because if you did that to me with alcohol in a glass and said you can have one sip, but you have to make this last forever, and that's it.
That's brutal.
I would rather just say I have none and throw it into the garbage, and then I really would have none.
You got to be careful. If you tell God what your hell is, maybe He will force you into that when you get down into the fiery pits. I don't know. It's just an area where we could bring in that religious aspect a little bit and just talk about stuff that everybody kind of understands what zero is. We assume through the basic understanding of our education, zero. That's a thing. Life goes on. But if you really want to break down to it, like to the simplest concepts, it's a difficult one. And you could benefit from thinking about it. So this is a cool thing that you see all the time in life. But if you overlook it, you may never learn how wild and cool it is.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, right? You know, I mean, death is not the end. Everybody wants to claim that we're going to go to a religious heaven. We're going to go to all these different places. You know, we're going to live forever. In essence, they are right, just they're wrong in their conclusions. If you think about it, when we do die, we denigrate into the earth, right? You know, we become part of the soil unless we're in a casket. Then it takes a lot longer.
Until we get cooked by the sun, baby.
Until we get cooked by the sun. But if you think about it, and I like to say this, you know, we become stardust again. You know, and I know that sounds kind of romanticized and all that gibberish, but it's true to me, right? You know, I mean, there is parts of people that have passed away that I love and have valued that are still here. There are parts of them that will always be here, even if I don't recognize them as humans, right? There's parts of my father-in-law that, you know, I'll remember forever. He's touched my life. I have physical objects from him. But even after I pass and the memories are gone, there's still his ashes. Those will still, you know, be a part of everything. And if we, as we just talked about, at some point it continues to break down, but he's still there, which means we're nothing more than made up of lots of other dead people that have been recycled over and over again.
It's so romantic. We're all dead people.
We're all dead people walking on this earth. But when you look at it, and we just look at this theory of everything, it does actually give me a little bit of solace to say, hey, I'm okay with being, you know, a skeptic in the realm of not knowing what's going to happen to us after death, because I know at minimum my body is going to live on in some aspects of life. And I'm just hoping that at some point it nurtures humanity and helps prevent the sun from an untimely heat death. With that being said, we've had an amazing episode. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back next week, 9 p.m. Eastern, with another amazing time. Have a good night, everyone.
You've been listening to a presentation of Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker, cellardoorskeptics.com.